Good morning. I'm Frank Byron. This is Joy. And I would just like to thank the church for praying for me during my recent illness, and also thank God for the miraculous recovery. Amen. So this morning, we're reading from Daniel chapter 10, verses 1 through 19. And in your Bible, your Pew Bible, it's 1394. It goes like this. In the 3rd year of King Cyrus of Persia, a revelation was given to Daniel, who was called Belteshazzar. The message was true, and it concerned a great war. The understanding of the meeting came to him in a vision. At that time, I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice food, no meat, no wine touched my lips, and I used no lotions for 3 weeks until it was all over. On the 24th day of the first month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, the Tigris, I looked up, and there before me was a man dressed in linen, with a belt of fine gold from Upaz around his waist. His body was like topaz, his face like burning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of a multitude. I, Daniel, was the only one who saw this vision. Those who were with me did not see it, but much terror overwhelmed them, that they fled and hid themselves. So I was left alone, gazing at this great vision. I had no strength left. My face turned deadly pale, and I was helpless. Then I heard him speaking, and as I listened to him, I fell into a deep sleep, my face to the ground. A hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. He said, Daniel, you who are highly esteemed, consider carefully the words I'm about to speak to you, and stand up, for I have been sent to you. And when he said this to me, I stood up, trembling. Joy.
Then he continued, do not be afraid, Daniel, since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to them. But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to me, because I was detained there with the king of Persia. Now I have come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future, for the vision concerns a time yet to come. While he was saying this to me, I bowed my face toward the ground and was speechless. Then one who looked like a man touched my lips, and I opened my mouth and began to speak. I said to the one standing before me, I am overcome with anguish because of the vision, my Lord, and I feel very weak. How can I, your servant, talk with you, my Lord? My strength is gone, and I can hardly breathe. Again, the one who looked like a man touched me and gave me strength. Do not be afraid, you who are highly esteemed, he said. Peace, be strong now, be strong. When he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, speak, my Lord, since you have given me strength. This is the word of God.
Yeah, may the Lord add his blessing to his word. Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you, Frank and Joy. Well, for 2 weeks, we're returning to Daniel. We're in Daniel throughout the fall, and this week and next week, before we start a spring series, we're coming back to Daniel because we left these last chapters alone. Daniel is a wonderful book. The first 6 chapters are well known. If you've ever been in Sunday school anywhere, you've done some of the stories from the first 6 chapters of Daniel. Chapter 7 is magnificent, central to understanding of Christ. I preached on that last fall. Chapter 9 is one of the great prayers of the Old Testament. And then you come to chapter 10, which is just weird to modern ears. And so is chapter 11, and so is chapter 12, which is exactly why most preachers skip it. And quite honestly, which is exactly why I wanted to return to it. Because if you read through the Bible in a year or you read through the Bible in 2 years like we're doing right now, you will come across many of these types of passages. Passages that describe these incredible spiritual encounters with supernatural entities and apocalyptic visions. These are everywhere in the Bible. If your eyes are open to just the presence of angels, think about the Christmas story. They're everywhere in the Bible. They are, as it says, they're not a bug, they're a feature. And so what are we to do with this? What is clear is that this some understanding, a deep understanding, a vibrant understanding of the world as a place that is not just what we see and hear, but is supernatural, infused with supernatural reality. That is the world the Bible presents to us as real. And so what are we to do with it? What are we to think about passages like this? How are we to understand them? This morning I want to go to chapter 10. Next week, Lord willing, to chapter 12. And look at what this passage of Daniel's vision Daniel's visions here has to say to us. This morning, three things I want to hope we see. The reality we can't see. I hope we see the reality we can't see. The war we can't win, and therefore the help we must have. Three things. Now, the reality we can't see. This starts with Daniel troubled by a vision that he has had, and it could be one of the visions like he had in Daniel chapter 8 or Daniel chapter 2. He had various visions of the coming events, things that were going to happen. Indeed, the next great empires. Babylon was going to fall to Persia, Persia to Greece, and Greece then would fall into 4 parts. That is explicitly laid out in Daniel chapter 8, and that is exactly ancient history, if you read it in any book you want to find. Babylon fell to the Medo-Persian Empire, which fell to the Greek Empire of Alexander the Great, which broke up after Alexander died into 4 parts. In other words, there is coming not just Babylon forever, Babylon the Great, stability. What is coming is falling and rising of kingdom after kingdom and much war. And Daniel sees something of this. He has been given visions of something like this, and so he actually mourns, he fasts, he comes to the Lord again and again. He's this spiritual mourning and fasting, no doubt a time of prayer. And in the midst of that, he has this incredible, overwhelming vision. And the first part of the vision that is described is this vision of a man? I say that with question marks because, look, it is a very strange depiction. In verse 5, he looks up and he sees, I looked up and there before me was a man dressed in linen. That's the possibly referring to like the robes of the priests. Dressed in linen with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like topaz. It's a stone, depending on maybe in that time more of like a yellowish, orangish stone. His face like lightning. His eyes like flaming torches. His arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze. And his voice like the sound of a multitude. This is a very strange description. It's not the only description like this in the Bible. Daniel sees someone, and there are 2 other places where there's a very, very similar description. You'll notice that the comparisons are different, but it's a very, very similar description in 2 places, both of which are depicting a vision of God. One is Ezekiel 1, 26 to 28. Pam has some slides. You can see this, and I'll read it. The prophet Ezekiel, at the beginning of Ezekiel, looks up and sees the throne of God, and he says he saw on that throne was a figure like that of a man. I saw that from what appeared to be his waist up looked like glowing metal, as if full of fire, and that from there down he looked like fire, and brilliant lights surrounded him. I love this part. Like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the radiance around him. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell face down, and I heard the voice of one speaking. Incredible, right? Then Revelation 1, Apostle John sees someone like a son of man. He sees Jesus. It is clear. He sees Jesus, and this is how he describes him. Revelation 1. Jesus was dressed in a robe reaching down to his feet with a golden sash around his chest. The hair on his head was white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace. His voice was like the sound of rushing waters. Understand what that means. Daniel says the sound was like a multitude. Rushing waters, think of like rapids. You know the roar of water rushing? In his right hand he held 7 stars. Coming out of his mouth was a sharp double-edged sword. His face was like the sun shining in all its brilliance. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. You see the similarities, different comparisons, all very similar visions. What is it that is going on here? First, all are describing an overwhelming, intensely overwhelming vision of another reality. Indeed, all of these are describing a vision of God. Indeed, we can be even more specific. I think all 3 of these are telling us about a vision of the second person of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, in all of his glory. This is what is being described to us. And what we also can see through these different things is that these passages are using comparisons to try to describe the indescribable. They're using different metals or sources of light or noises. It was like lightning. It was like the light that is around a rainbow. It was like bronze that is burning. It was like snow that's on fire. You know, they're trying to find words to describe the indescribable. One commentator says, Daniel ransacked the vocabulary of precious stones, metals, and elements trying to describe him. It's like bronze, it's like topaz, it's like he's just trying to find words. And you hear the same thing in John and in Ezekiel. They are trying to describe the indescribable. I mean, think about this. I heard one New Testament scholar, D.A. Carson, said once that the strange descriptions in some of the apocalyptic visions are the product of the prophet trying to find words to describe something for which in this world there are no words. So think about if you were trying to describe to people 300 years ago the Zoom call you had with your friend in Virginia this weekend. I mean, just think about how you would describe that. And you can't use so many of the words that you would go to try to use. You can't use screen. 300 years ago, what's a screen? You mean television? What's a television? Computer? Huh? Right? How do you describe to people who aren't in this world something that is not of this world? And this is what the prophets are trying to do. This is what these visions are doing. But more than that, these visions, and the Bible records a number of these, are in unveiling a reality that we cannot see with our eyes. They pull back the veil. They are seeking to describe the undescribable, to provoke our imagination, to stir our wonder, and to humble us before the reality of the living God. God, these visions are saying, is not one you can easily slot into your everyday experience and domesticated expectations. God does not fit in your easy summary of who he is. He is bigger, he is bolder, he is blazing in his glory. When you see him, you don't say, hey, how's it going? You fall as dead at his feet. That's what happens. He's not tame, these visions say. And that is in one sense, in many ways, that's what is happening. This is what we cannot see that the Bible is seeking to reveal to us, what we cannot see apart from God's revelation. And it points us to a greater reality that's actually the most fundamental reality that there is. One theologian, John Jefferson Davis, says this, according to the Bible. Now look at this, flips it upside down. The reality we can't see is actually more real, more fundamental than the things we can see. This is what Davis says. According to the Bible, spirit is more enduringly and powerfully real than matter. The invisible things are more enduringly and powerfully real than the visible. That is to say, God is more real than Mount Everest or the floor you're standing on. And when Mount Everest and the floor you're standing on melt away, there will be God. More full, more real, the ultimate real. And the shock of these passages is not just this vision of God, but that This God is a personal God, wise, holy, alive. C.S. Lewis wrote about his own conversion. He said, at this point, when you begin to understand what Christianity is saying, that there is a real God who is very real and is very much alive and is very much a person, he says, at this point, many people feel like they would pull back. He said, at this point, if I could have, I would have pulled back from Christianity. That's what he says. He says, an impersonal God, well and good. A subjective God of beauty, truth, and goodness inside my own head, better still. A formless life force surging through us, a vast power that we can tap into when we want to, best of all. But God himself, alive, pulling at the other end of the cord, perhaps approaching at an infinite speed. That, he said, there comes a moment when people who've been dabbling in religion suddenly draw back and say, what if we find God? We never meant it to come to that, he says. Daniel has his eyes opened and he is given to see the reality, the fundamental reality that natural sight alone can't behold. And he collapses. He falls, it says, into a deep sleep, my face to the ground. And what I think happens then, this is the reality we can't see that's open to him, the reality of God, the supernatural. He falls into a deep sleep, and then he is awoken by what I believe is a new figure, an angel, who awakens him and gives him a message. And having been his eyes open to the reality of God, the reality he can't see, he's now shown another thing he didn't even know what was happening, which is a war that is going on, and it's a war that he can't win. Daniel is awoken by an angel. In fact, the angel touches him 3 times. I thought for just a second of entitling the sermon, Touched by an Angel, if you remember that sermon, but I thought better of it. He's touched 3 times. The angel touches him and sets him trembling on his hands and knees and gives him a message. Daniel, you who are highly esteemed, consider carefully, this is verse 11, consider carefully the words I'm about to speak to you and stand up, for I have now been sent to you. And when he said this to me, I stood up trembling. The Bible not only opens up a vision for us of a world in which there's God, but a world in which there are angels. Sent ones. The book of Hebrews says, are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who inherit salvation? That's what this angel says. I've been sent to you to serve you. And this, too, is all over the Bible. Christ himself speaks multiple times about the reality of angels. In fact, Jesus says, on the night he is betrayed, when after Peter draws a sword and cuts off the ear of the one who's trying to arrest him, Jesus says, put away your sword. He says, Peter, don't you know, at a moment I could give the command and 12 legions of angels would come and fight for me. Do you know how many soldiers are in a legion, Roman legion? 6,000. That means Jesus says I could give a word and 72,000 angels would be here. This is Jesus. Andrew Wilson, who's a writer, said spiritual beings appear in virtually every book of the Bible. In the world of the Old Testament, angels and demons are as real and ordinary and commonplace as animals. Now, not always seen, to be sure, but they show up as frequently as animals. In other words, the Bible is telling us that this is a part of reality. This is, again, strange to us as modern people. Strange to us. It's something we can't see with the natural eye, and as modern people, we trust our natural eyes above everything else. But maybe here's a helpful way of thinking about it. There's a philosopher named Peter Kreeft, who's a philosopher at Boston College, and he said there's really 3 philosophies for understanding the world. Just 3. 3 philosophies for understanding the world. And he gives them these names. He says one is moreness. Moreness, which is that there is more to reality than I know or comprehend. It's the root of wonder. Moreness. He says it's the philosophy of Hamlet. In his Shakespeare's play, Hamlet sees the ghost of his dead father when he's with his friend Horatio, and Horatio's freaking out saying there's no such thing as ghosts, and Hamlet says to Horatio, there are more things, moreness, there are more things in heaven and on earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in all your philosophy. Kreeft says, most great writers, poets, artists, and philosophers, all the saints and sages have believed this philosophy. All pre-modern cultures believe this philosophy. Many cultures around the world believe this philosophy now, and all children believe in moreness until they are educated out of it by adults. That's one philosophy, moreness. The second one, he says, is lessness, that there's actually less going on than it looks like. This is reductionism. This is the belief, materialism, that basically there's just atoms, molecules, and matter. There's just the stuff bumping into each other that's going on. There's no love, there's just chemicals in your brain. There's no truth, there's just events. There's no great meaning. There's just what you make up as a chunk of matter until you fall apart as a chunk of matter. If you think I'm exaggerating, Richard Dawkins, who was taught at Oxford University and was one of the new atheists writing books on atheism a few years ago that were causing a bit of a stir in certain circles. He wrote a book called The God Delusion, and he is a firm believer in lessness. This is what he said. Think about it. This is his description of the universe. Think about it. On one planet, and possibly only one planet in the entire universe, molecules that would normally make nothing more complicated than a chunk of rock gather themselves together into chunks of rock-sized matter. Here he's talking about you and me. The molecules gather together into chunks of rock-sized matter of such staggering complexity that they are capable of running and jumping and swimming and flying and seeing and hearing and capturing and eating other chunks of complexity. Capable in some cases of thinking and feeling and falling in love with yet other chunks of complex matter. He's a real romantic. Say to the person you love, I am one chunk of complex matter who seems to have fallen in love with you, another chunk of complex matter. But you see, what he is saying is all there is molecules, brains, stuff you can measure, bumping into one another, and even love is just the firing of chemicals in your complex, made-up matter that will all just fall apart into less complex matter. Lessness. Or sameness. These are the three philosophies: moreness, lessness, or sameness, which is pretty much, what you see is what you get. We understand what is real. What is real, we understand. We pretty much have it all figured out, we modern Western people. In other words, these are Kreeft's words. In other words, we're know-it-alls. What's inside our mind and what is outside match pretty perfectly. He says to believe that, you either have to be a genius or very arrogant or both. And honestly, have the last 2 years taught us anything about the power of unseen realities to shape our lives in ways we don't really understand? Moreness, lessness, or sameness. What do you believe? Well, it's clear what the Bible teaches. Moreness. There is more. There is more in heaven and earth than what your eyes and mind can see, comprehend, touch, measure. And if you look in the history of the church around the world to this day, and you look at the history of the church throughout history, what you see is a commonplace acceptance of the reality of the supernatural. In fact, if you go now and worship with the fastest growing church in the world, which is in Africa, they will have no trouble talking to you about angels and demons. In fact, this has been documented in many places. You know the people who are the most skeptical about spiritual realities? White, prosperous, modern Europeans and Americans. Our Christian brothers and sisters throughout history and around the world believe these things are real. C.S. Lewis said the devil's greatest trick was convincing us he doesn't exist. Now, this is moreness. Daniel here, and this is what Daniel has. Daniel here has a vision, not only of God, but he has a vision of these supernatural beings, and not just of supernatural beings, but of some conflict with these supernatural beings. Again, this is mysterious. I don't pretend to understand all of this, but he says in verse 13, I've come to you, but the prince of the Persian kingdom, this is the angel saying, I came to you, Daniel, I came to bring you understanding, a message from God, but the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, that's another angel, came to help me because I was detained there with the king of Persia. Now I've come to you. Very strange. What is this? Among angels, there aren't just, as I've already said, angels, but angels and demons. Good spiritual forces, bad spiritual forces locked in some kind of conflict. That, again, is not just Daniel. Jesus speaks this way And famously, Ephesians chapter 6 says this, "Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly realms." This is a war. There's some kind of spiritual war that is going on, and it is a war that Daniel, having seen it, cannot win. He's never told what to do to fight for this, which is probably a good thing because Daniel is ruthlessly honest about the fact that seeing these supernatural realities actually wrecks him. One commentator says it's almost comic how many different things he says about the way he is falling apart. He says in verse 8, "I had no strength left, my face turned deathly pale, and I was helpless." He does not brag about, "I had a vision of angels, I was chatting with them." He says, "I fell apart, I was pale, I felt helpless." Verse 9, he says, "I fell asleep on the ground." I was just instantly had narcolepsy and boom, just like passed out after seeing God. He says in verse 11, "I stood up, but when I stood up, I was trembling." He says in verse 15, "I bowed face to the ground, unable to speak." And he says in verse 16 to the angel, the one who had touched his lips so he could speak, he says, "I am overcome with anguish because of the vision, my Lord, and I feel very weak. How can I, your servant, talk with you, my Lord? My strength is gone, and I can hardly breathe." This is a big problem. Not only is there this great spiritual reality, not only is there good and evil in this great spiritual reality, but not only can he not see it, what is he going to do to impact it? Nothing. Nothing. And if you get a sense, as people in other parts of the world have, or if you were to believe what the Bible says, that there is more going on, there are spiritual forces at work, great spiritual forces at work, you have a sense of your own weakness and helplessness in such situations. To give another example, this feels abstract. You know the first 3 steps of the 12-step program, by far the most successful program for helping people deal with and come in recovery from addiction. The first 3 steps are these. Step 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. Step 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Step 3, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. In other words, the foundation of the most successful program for helping free people from the iron chains of addiction starts with saying, there are things going on that are controlling me that are bigger than me, and the only way out of this is through God. And if you think about it, spiritual realities are the deepest realities with real power in this broken world. Have you faced the intractable problems of evil and brokenness? Deep, deep brokenness beyond your power to fix. Relational dynamics with patterns of just conflict and sin and grievance and dysfunction in your family or in you that have this pull that you keep repeating. The deep and seductive and devastating pull of addictions and patterns of sin, the apathy, the darkness that pulls us away from God, the deep-rooted conflict between groups of people, between nations that sometimes just stirs up in these ways that just is evil. And the moreness that Daniel sees includes the reality of forces that are working against us. And so Daniel has his eyes open. He's given this vision to see the reality of God. There's a natural sight he can't see. And then he's given a vision of a war that is going on that he can't win. Thankfully, he also is pointed toward the help that he and that we must have. The good news in all of this strangeness is that help is sent to Daniel. That's what the angel is. God shows himself to him in a vision of brilliant light. This very vision is a sign that God is drawing near to him. Then he's visited by an angel who touches him and encourages him, lifts him up, strengthens him. He tells him, the angel keeps telling him, Daniel, you're highly esteemed. I want you to listen carefully. Daniel, if anyone, the angel is a ministering spirit who is coaching him through it. Come on, Daniel, get up. Be strong now. Be strong. That's what he says in verse 16. Peace, Daniel. Be strong now. Be strong. that there is actually a God and the reality of other spiritual goodness that is working on Daniel's behalf, in fact, to fight for him. And the greater encouragement of this whole chapter is this: that Daniel is shown a God who fights for his people. If what I've laid out is right, the one that Daniel first sees is not only God, but looking at the description from Revelation, the description from Ezekiel, the one that Daniel first sees is Jesus. Jesus revealed to be in all of his glory who he deeply is. He is not just a man. He is not just a good teacher. The Jesus Christ who the Scriptures reveal is God descended among us, but don't miss it. In all of his humility, in all of his weakness that he embraced, in all of that, don't miss it. The Scriptures say the reality, the also true reality of Jesus is that he is glorious and powerful and mighty and eternal and God. And one who fights for us. When John sees in Revelation this Jesus, when he sees him, he not only sees him glowing like lightning and burning like fire and all of these things, he hears the voice of Jesus, which is like the sound of rushing waters, and he hears Jesus say to John, "Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and now look, I am alive forever and ever, and I hold the keys of death and hell." That's Jesus. The greater one who showed himself to Daniel and came to fight for us. Colossians says that when Jesus came and went to the cross, when he died there, he took our legal indebtedness. This is Colossians chapter 2. He took the charges that evil had against us, the consequences of our sin by which evil enslaves and owns us. He took those and nailed it to the cross. That's what it says in Colossians 2. And having disarmed at the cross the powers and authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them. In other words, the Scripture says that this Jesus came down to fight for us, died for us, and when he walked out of the grave on Easter Sunday, proclaimed he has all the power in all of creation over every force of all kinds, the keys of death and hell and the grave. There is no one with more authority, more power, more light, more goodness, more holiness, more than him. And that is why Romans 8 says this: "For I am convinced, you that are in Christ, I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all the moreness of creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord." Amen. This is a strange text, but this is what it shows us. So three quick applications. What does this mean? All of this, what does it mean? One, the reality we can't see. Do you understand when we gather in worship, we say often lightly, "Where two or three are gathered in his name, there he is in the midst of them." Do you understand what happens when we gather for worship as the church? We tend to put all kinds of faith in dramatic methods and certain kinds of things and popular and dynamic and popular and big screens and fireworks and all kinds of stuff. We think that's the exciting stuff. Instead of claiming God at his word and saying, when we come together in his name, that God, the God of glory and grace, the God beyond our understanding is here, so that at any moment when we come together in his name, things could happen in you and me that will change us for the rest of eternity. That's what we happen here. Do you come here taking God, if you're a Christian, do you come here taking God at his word, that this is not just going through the motions, this is meeting with a God beyond our expectations and our wildest dreams? And would you pray with me that our gathering for worship would be marked by this kind of Strange and mysterious, but spirit-powered sense of the presence of God. J.I. Packer wrote that the first and fundamental feature of revival, he studied revivals, he said the first and fundamental feature in revival is the sense that God has drawn awesomely near. Second, quick application. Daniel has this vision after an extended time of prayer and fasting. Don't get me wrong. There's no promise here that if you pray and fast for 3 weeks and don't put on lotions, if you noticed he did that. There's an explanation for that. I'll give it to you later. Don't get me wrong. This is not saying if you do that, God will instantly show up and throw you Jesus. I will tell you this, though. This world is full of distractions that wants to keep you from seeing the greater picture of what is. God wants to reveal to you who he is. And he does that through his word and prayer and worship and service and fellowship. And if you are going to do these simple disciplines, you're going to have to work at it. You're going to have to fight distraction. You're going to have to not let your vision be shaped simply by this world that will fill it up with Candy Crush or whatever the new game is. Seek the Lord while he may be found, Isaiah says. And lastly, this vision means that we are surrounded by a greater reality than our eyes can see, and that is the reality toward which we are headed, which is a warning. Hebrews 10:31 says it is a dreadful thing to fall into the hands of the living God, meaning to meet God and not know him as Savior and as friend. But this is also an encouragement. This life is not all there is, not by a long shot. This life, Martin Luther said in 1521, he said, "This life is not the end, but it is the road." And at the end of that road, Christian, stands the awesome and living God, the one who is the beginning and the end, the living one who died and is now alive with the scars still on his hands from when he died for you, who waits to welcome you to a glory beyond your imagination. Don't lose sight of that. That life is the real life, as good as this life is in many ways. And it's the one to which we are heading. May God show us reality and give us faith to believe. Would you pray with me? And then we're going to stand and sing in closing. Take just a moment, ask the Spirit, ask God to show him what he would show you in all of this.